conduct massive and targeted cyber
Mr. President,
attacks
Mr. President, thank you so much. It was an honor to talk to you, and I think it sounds absurd to say this, but please stay safe, and we hope we will get a chance to talk to you again.
Thank you for your prayer for it, and thank you for all American citizens for being together with us in this fighting from with the devil. Thank you.
Next on GPS, Robert Gates.
$32-25. The next mat over in Class B features.
He can use the other 20% to continue to finance his war machine. It's time to remove all Russian financial institutions from the international payment system. It's time to impose sanctions on his oil and gas exports, which he uses as his primary means of financial support. We need to rush those weapons that were announced for delivery yesterday to the front. Anti-tank, anti-aircraft missiles, sniper rifles, ammunition, fuel supplies. It should have been done weeks ago, so better late than never, but the Ukrainians have no time. They have no time, George. There is not a minute to lose, and we need to stand with them.
How about this call from the Ukrainian ambassador for American businesses, the American people, to do more?
American businesses can do more, George. We don't have nearly the same kind of financial ties to Russia as European businesses do, but I would encourage every American company to scrub all of their operations, to provide no support whatsoever to Vladimir Putin's regime as he's conducting this unprovoked war of aggression. There is more that we can all do. That starts this week in Washington, where we can provide more immediate assistance in terms of weapons and financial support to the Ukrainian regime, and imposing truly severe sanctions on Vladimir Putin, not the half measures that we continue to see.
We saw this announcement from Vladimir Putin this morning that he's put his nuclear forces on a state of heightened alert right now. You saw my exchange with Jen Psaki right there. Is Vladimir Putin acting in a rational manner? Is he mentally there? Or, as your colleague Senator Rubio said, something is off right now?
George, I'm not going to play psychologist from 7,000 miles away. I will say this. What Vladimir Putin said on Monday night was not a surprise. He published the exact same arguments about Ukraine in an essay last summer. That's why I've been urging the administration to take the threat that Putin posed to Ukraine and international peace and stability seriously, to start imposing these sanctions weeks and months ago, to start sending these missiles and weapons and ammunition to Ukraine weeks ago. Ms. Psaki said that we all made the mistake of viewing Vladimir Putin as someone who sees the world through global norms. George, I never made that mistake. I've always seen Vladimir Putin as a ruthless dictator who wants to reassemble the greater Russian Empire. And he took the imperial ambitions he's always had and what he perceived as hesitancy and indecision on the part of the West and went for the jugular earlier this week. Thankfully, the brave Ukrainian people are fighting back, and every day they can hold out, George. They continue to stiffen the spines of leaders in the West. So we need to urge them on, and we need to continue providing them the weapons they need to fight back.
You've never made that mistake. It is true. You've been stalwart in your opposition to Vladimir Putin. The same cannot be said for the leader of your party, Donald Trump. Last night, he finally condemned the invasion, but he also repeated his praise of Putin, calling him smart. Earlier in the week, he called him pretty smart. He called him savvy. He says NATO and the U.S. are dumb. Are you prepared to condemn that kind of rhetoric from the leader of your party?
George, you've heard what I have to say about Vladimir Putin, that he is a ruthless dictator who's launched a naked, unprovoked war of aggression. Thankfully, the Ukrainian army has anti-tank missiles that President Obama would not supply, that we did supply last time Republicans were in charge in Washington. That's why it's so urgent that we continue to supply those weapons to Ukraine.
Why can't you condemn Donald Trump for those comments?
George, if you want to know what Donald Trump thinks about Vladimir Putin or any other topic, I'd encourage you to invite him on your show. I don't speak on behalf of other politicians. They can speak for themselves. I speak on behalf of Arkansans, who I talked to this week and who are appalled at what they saw in Ukraine, and they want me right now to fight in Washington to support those brave Ukrainians.
You're a senior member of the Republican Party. Donald Trump is the leader of the Republican Party. He said last night again, suggested that he would be running for president. When Fox News asked him if he had a message for Vladimir Putin, he said he has no message. Why can't you condemn that? I feel quite confident that if Barack Obama or Joe Biden said something like that, you'd be first in line to criticize him.
Again, George, if you want to talk to the former president about his views or his message, you can have him on your show. My message to Vladimir Putin is quite clear. He needs to leave Ukraine unless he wants to face moms and teenagers with Molotov cocktails and grandmothers and grandfathers with AK-47s for years to come. I'm speaking on behalf of all Arkansans who want me to send that message to him.
If Donald Trump runs again, can you support him?
George, I'm not worried about this fall's election right now, much less an election 2 years from now. I'm focused on the naked war of aggression that Vladimir Putin has launched in Ukraine right now. There's not a moment to lose. We can worry about electoral politics down the road.
Former President Trump was out there talking about it last night. I simply don't understand why you can't condemn his praise of Vladimir Putin.
George, again, I don't speak on behalf of other politicians. They can all speak for themselves. I'm delivering my message to you, which I said has been clear, whether Barack Obama was president, whether Donald Trump was president, and now whether Joe Biden was president, that Vladimir Putin has been a ruthless dictator for years. Too many people have not taken the threat seriously, and that's why you see the images we see in Ukraine now. And where we need to focus is on stopping that aggression, supporting the Ukrainians as best we can.
Senator Cotton, thanks for your time this morning. Roundtable's up next. We'll be right back.
You would just get the same present.
Well, maybe you would. You'd get the same presents over.
Let's hear from David in Michigan, Democrats line.
Hi. I'd like to say that Putin is really a war criminal, and my fellow Americans are not the enemy. But I watched the CPAC speech of Donald Trump in horror. The idea that this man could become president, he spent more time vilifying Biden and Trudeau than he did Putin. He still has never criticized Putin. He said the war was catastrophic and bad, but he didn't say anything bad about Putin. Again, he said he was smart. His arguments are a tissue of lies made at a junior high level, and that's being generous. His continuing lies about the election without proof. He lied again about the Durham report. Even Durham says that there was not spying.
Okay, well, back to the topic of Russia and Ukraine. How does all that relate to the topics of today?
Well, the idea that he could become president and enable Putin, it's totally related. I mean, you showed his speech twice. In 2016, he questioned the legitimacy of Ukraine. He was impeached for trying to bribe Zelenskyy to get dirt on Biden. He weakened NATO. Remember him pushing people away so he could get in front of the photo? He acts like a mob boss. He destroys documents, incited an insurrection to steal the election. He's a weakling who acts like a bully, and people think he's strong.
Okay.
Come on, Republicans. You're becoming an anti-democratic, anti-American fringe cult.
Okay, That's David. That's David there in Michigan. We'll go to Shu in Snowflake, Arizona, Republican line.
Good morning. At first, I'd like to say that Ukraine has been trying for some time now to get to be on NATO and protected. And I just find it a little strange that Biden thinks that what he's done is going to help the people of Ukraine. I believe that the reason why Biden does not want to act against Russia and China, because the information that they both know on Biden and his son. The United States has never stood by before and watched such killing go on without making a move. No president in the United States has ever stood by like Biden and watched this. There's more behind this than Americans know.
Such as what?
I believe that what is going on in years past with Russia and China and Biden and his son and his brother and his whole family is why Biden hasn't made a move.
Okay. That's Shu there in Snowflake, Arizona, from MLB off our Twitter feed, writing that I'm simultaneously heartbroken and inspired by the Ukrainian people. David Roth off our Twitter feed saying Ukraine is Putin's war on past and future, not only in Europe, but here to weaken the president of the United States and reinstall his puppet, Trump. Perfectly fine with the Republican Party to kill thousands of innocent people for this goal. Steve in Ohio texting us this morning saying all the Democrats can talk about is Trump. I can't blame them, even if they are ashamed of Biden, how Putin ran circles around him. Enjoy your weekend in Delaware, Mr. President. Again, if you want to text us, you could do that at 202-748-8003. Post on Twitter, as some of you have, many of you have this morning at C-SPAN WJ. Facebook is available too at facebook.com/C-SPAN. Johnny up next in Massachusetts Independent Line. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to make a couple of comments. First of all, I do believe that a lot of this is tied to, energy markets, and I agree with a lot of the previous callers that we ought to be adopting a policy whereby we're strengthening our hand in that space, i.e., we begin to ramp up our own domestic production in order to become, far more independent from an energy perspective, and also begin to become a bigger player in the export market, thus competing with the Russians, primary export commodity. And the second thing that I have of concern is all of this talk about removing the Russians from the SWIFT system, which would then prevent them from having access to financing in U.S. dollars. I just think about the impact of the just general law of supply and demand. If we're going to reduce the demand on dollars because of the Russians now are going to be settling those energy trades in a different currency, the impact that this is going to have on the dollar. Thus, it's going to be something, in my estimation, that's going to further weaken our economic kind of position, as the role of the petrodollar now is going to be undermined as a result of that policy. And so I'm concerned with some of the approaches that the Biden administration is taking here, in that I don't think it's necessarily going to strengthen our hand from an economic perspective. Thank you.
Johnny in Massachusetts, this is...
to realize their own agency in this, right? And also, I hope that
the Ukrainians are fighting for their country, for their families, for their children. They're going to be ferocious fighters. I think they're already proving that. I don't think Vladimir Putin quite expected this level of resistance. So the West must support those freedom-loving people in Ukraine.
It strikes me that in the last, since the year 2000, we've had 4 presidents, and Russia has invaded another country during 3 of the 4. Under George W. Bush, he invaded Georgia. Under Clinton, invading Crimea, invading now Ukraine. He did not invade any country under President Trump. And I know that President Trump had a partnership or a relationship with the head of Saudi Arabia, whereas when Trump asked him to ramp up production, he did, and oil prices went down. Now you're seeing a partnership between MBS, the Crown Prince in Saudi Arabia, and Russia, and the CCP, Xi Jinping, and Russia, all adversaries of America.
Well, this is pretty simple. What gives Vladimir Putin and his cronies their leverage? They have oil and they have nuclear weapons. It's just that simple. And so the response ought to be relatively simple as well. We ought to pursue what has always been a bipartisan goal of fossil fuel independence, which is what we did pursue under the last administration. But under this administration, under Democrat governance, Democrat policies, literally is a war on fossil fuels. We were energy independent. Yeah. All of a sudden, we're not under the Biden administration. That weakens America. That weakens the West. And, of course, Europe, their leadership in Germany make themselves more and more dependent on Putin's oil, not defending themselves, not contributing their own defense. They didn't like it when President Trump said you at minimum have to pay your 2%. They haven't even done that. Now they're doing it today. I hope it's not too little too late.
So much has changed since I was Gen Z's age back in the, I love that picture, back in the 90s. Same-sex couples can legally marry. LGBTQ people work at all levels of the federal government, including the cabinet, with Pete Buttigieg serving as our Married with Children Transportation Secretary. Popular culture is filled with LGBTQ representation too. And I'm out, a columnist at The Post, a contributor to PBS NewsHour, and an anchor here at MSNBC. I'm thrilled my mother was proved wrong, and so is she. Perhaps the best thing today's LGBTQ Americans have that my generation didn't when we were 25 is public support. When the Don't Say Gay bill made news, the President of the United States tweeted condemnation. Hours after Abbott's order in Texas, Beto O'Rourke, who's now running for governor, tweeted, "To every trans kid in Texas, you're amazing. You belong right here in Texas." Of course, actions have always spoken louder than words. But this Gen X gay man is old enough to remember when we had to fight as hard as we could just for the words. The arc of our moral universe started to bend when we not only demanded to be acknowledged, but also demanded equal justice under the law. The fight for equality is nowhere near over, but a world in which 21% of Gen Z is comfortable identifying as something as other than heterosexual shows that it's not just beginning either. Up next, my conversation about this ray of hope and the danger it's facing in Republican-led states with Rashad Robinson, president of The Color Change.
95% camps for some refugees who had come from Syria, from Afghanistan, from other countries. And it appears as if some refugees are treated differently based on their country of origin, if they're European or not. How do you explain that?
The Polish government and other governments have indicated that they're opening their borders for all who are crossing from Ukraine. But we're also engaging very, very closely with these governments. We're engaging closely with the UN agencies on the ground to ensure that we provide them with the resources that they need and the support that they need to ensure that every single refugee crossing into neighboring countries are received equally and with the same amount of protection.
You know, I'm talking about Poland building a wall against the border with Belarus to block refugees in the past. Madam Ambassador, I mean, big picture here. I understand your role at the United Nations, but it is just the entire purpose of the UN to prevent something like this from ever happening again. It's why it was created after World War II in the first place. Isn't what's happening now, though, showing that global order is failing the people of Ukraine?
What is happening now is that the Russian government has shown its disrespect for the UN Charter and for all of the principles that we believe in, and they are isolated. In that approach, they're isolated here in the United Nations. We are pushing here at the UN to continue to call out their aggressive actions. We will continue to isolate them and to push for them to respect the Charter and cease this aggressive action against Ukraine.
Madam Ambassador, thank you for your time this morning. Face the Nation will be back in a minute, so please stay with us.
Mass General Brigham.
Service at Putin's hands that was televised a few days ago suggests that there are a lot of people who have concerns about this decision. And all we can hope is that opposition inside Russia builds as they realize the cost of this invasion of Ukraine.
Secretary Gates, pleasure to have you on always, sir. Thank you. And we will be back.
If you have advanced
Again, we'll iron out those details later this week. Aberdeen, again, we're going to be mostly in the 30s, although tomorrow we're up to about 43. Slight chance of snow Wednesday night into Thursday, also again with that system this weekend. And then we will turn a little bit cooler again towards the back half of that 10-day forecast, but not too far off from average. And finally, in Pierre, 50s and 60s Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, 40s Thursday, Friday, and then that chance of
focusing on what they have gotten done rather than what they have not, and trying to change the gears ahead of this critical midterm election when they're trying to keep the House and the Senate.
It does appear, Donna, that Build Back Better is pretty dead.
I don't think it's dead, George. Look, anything can be revived, especially in politics. And I just want to say, scriptures tell us that, you know, weeping may endure for a night, but joy cometh in the morning. Sarah, I know that there's a great challenge not to appear joyful, but you know what? Compared to where we were a year ago, 2 years ago, 4 years ago, I think we're in better shape.
That's not true for a lot of
hold on.
Americans,
Look, I can't speak for every American. I can only speak for myself. But the fact is, more companies are onshoring their jobs. Intel is going to start making chips in Texas and Ohio. Tell the good news so that the American people know that we're fighting to make their lives better. That's what I mean by weeping may endure for a night. Because joy can come in the morning if we believe that America's greatest days are ahead of us. That's what the State of the Union is. It's not just projecting the pain, but also the passion of what makes us Americans. I'm thinking about the people in Ukraine. The grandmothers with the AK-40 something. George, I don't even know what that looked like, okay? If you put that in a candy store, I'm like, I don't know any of those. But the fact that they're fighting, they're defiant, that is what this moment is about. And I think the president can project that on Tuesday.
And John, there's no question the president's speech is going to be transformed by Ukraine, by the fact that, you know, the war is going on as he is speaking.
Absolutely, an extraordinary moment, George. We see the aggression by Russia. We see a threat to the world order like we have not seen since World War II. This will have, in a sense, the feeling of a wartime speech. And in face of this aggression, this would be a moment of unity. You would expect a moment of unity, and yet you see the previous president coming out, Donald Trump, and as you mentioned in your interview with Tom Cotton, essentially praising Vladimir Putin, condemning the President of the United States. This is not normal. It is not right. It is not what you would expect to see in a time of national crisis. So he's going to be facing a chamber that will have, where he's going to be looking at a Republican Party that is deeply divided on this question and has an opportunity here to channel some of President Zelenskyy, channel some of the notion of standing up in face of the type of aggression that we haven't seen in more than a half century.
Sarah, this does seem to be a moment of crisis for the Republican Party as well. You've got President Trump out there calling Vladimir Putin smart, saying he has no message for him. You've got Tucker Carlson, probably the leader of the media in the Republican Party, who did an about-face this week after praising Putin and refusing to condemn what seemed to be happening in Ukraine. I want to ask you what I asked you off camera. I honestly, and this is an honest question, I don't understand why someone like Tom Cotton, Senator Tom Cotton, who has been stalwart against Vladimir Putin for years, is unwilling to condemn that kind of rhetoric for Donald Trump.
Because it doesn't end, right? We saw this in 2015. If you end up responding to Donald Trump, then you just respond to Donald Trump for the entirety of your candidacy or whatever you're doing. It's the most important issue out there. And Tom Cotton certainly was showing differences that he had with President Trump in terms of policy. But look, you have Vice President Pence, Mitch McConnell, lots of people breaking from President Trump at sort of that higher level. And what they have in common is that they don't need to raise money right now. 22 cents of every dollar being raised on the Republican side is going into Donald Trump's PACs. It has such a far-ranging effect that we're not even thinking about, that if you want to raise small dollar online donations, the vast majority of where these candidates are getting their money, it's either going to Donald Trump or you have to rent those lists, emails, et cetera, from Trump lists. And so you've got to have a Trump-friendly message if you want to raise that money. It's a huge problem for the Republican Party because those high-level people can break with him all they want. But if the candidates have to stay close to Donald Trump in order to be competitive, it affects who can run, and it certainly affects who can win.
The rest of the world does seem to be uniting behind Ukraine right now.
And also, all of the former presidents have come out and condemned Mr. Putin's aggression. George, look, I can't speak for the Republican Party and whether or not they're going to break from the former president, but I can tell you the American people are united and standing behind the Ukrainian people and our NATO alliances. I think that is what matters in this moment.
Rachel Scott, what more can we expect from Congress? There does seem to be some bipartisan support now for tougher sanctions, even as the president seems to be getting ahead of that over the weekend.
Yeah, and this is something that both Democrats and Republicans actually wanted to get done before they left off on recess, but there were just sharp disagreements on how far to go, how soon to impose those sanctions, and so it just didn't happen. All it amounted to was just a strongly worded resolution, essentially just condemning Russian aggression. So I think now that senators are back on Capitol Hill this week, we can start to hear more of these calls for imposing harsher sanctions, trying to get Democrats and Republicans on the same page. But again, they have struggled to remain united on this front when it comes to responding to what is happening in Ukraine, what's happening with Russian aggression. But definitely expect to hear more pressure, even from Democrats. We started hearing it from Senator Richard Blumenthal, another Democrat who said the president just should have acted sooner. He should have imposed those harsher sanctions earlier.
John, what does this mean?
Attacking NATO, saying that NATO was obsolete, attacking our allies. And we are certainly seeing today how crucially important NATO is, how crucially important our allies are. I was very pleased to see that Germany has announced that they will be raising their defense spending to 2%. One thing that President Trump got right was increased spending for the military. And it's very important for us, especially as we look at the challenges now, as we look at Putin's nuclear threat. We cannot adopt policies like a no first use nuclear policy. We can't accept defense spending that is insufficient to defend our interests. We have to make sure that we are recognizing here at home what's important and necessary to defend ourselves.
Well, I think that picture looks a lot different now that we see a city being bombed by Russia. We're going to talk about some of that ahead with H.R. McMaster. Thank you so much, Liz Cheney, for joining us. We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Caleb, and this is my...
Clear the lot sales event at Brilliant Toyota.
Moisturizers to help stop dry skin before it starts. Gold Bond Healing Lotion. Champion.
But I didn't let...
It is to have never spent 1 second on this earth wondering if my...
The Russians today or the
actions by Russians into Ukraine, and do you think it could expand from there?
Well, I think if we don't go in now, the Ukrainians they're going to fight to the death, and then and I believe that China will try to annex Taiwan after this because there's nobody defending these people, and it's mainly because the Russians have the nuke power. Back when we went into Iraq, Saddam didn't have nukes, and that's why we went in. But I really think Putin's bluffing. He's not going to be. He's had these nukes for years, not used them. He wouldn't do that.
Let's go to Jeannie, Plymouth, Indiana, Independent Line. Hi.
Hello, thank you. I just wanted to say that I'm really proud of the Ukrainians for standing up the way they are, and I hope that they're a good example to the Russian people who have also lived under a bunch of adversity, and if they can stand up and unite together, they're the ones who can stop Putin without having a nuclear war. And also, the people like Donald Trump and Steve Bannon praising Putin and the way he does things and loving Russian life, please go live there. That's where you need to be. See how much you like it. I particularly love being an American and having the freedoms we have. So,
that's Jeannie there that's Jeannie there in Indiana. One of the stories in the New York Times this morning takes a look at the topic of vodka in the light of current events. This is Ozzy Pabara saying that politicians in some states have called for bans on Russian-made vodka. She writes that he or she don't know exactly. In New Hampshire, where liquor and wine are sold through state-run stores, Governor Chris Sununu, a Republican, announced on Saturday the removal of, quote, Russian-made or Russian-branded spirits from our liquor and wine outlets until further notice. In Ohio, where state contracts with private businesses to sell liquor, Governor Mike DeWine, also a Republican, announced a halt to state purchases and sales of Russian standard vodka. It adds that L. Louise Lucas, a top Democrat in the Virginia State Senate, is calling for, quote, the removal of all Russian vodka or any Russian products from Virginia's nearly 400 state-run alcohol beverage control authority stores. This story adding that while 76.9 million 9-liter cases of vodka were sold in the United States in 2020, generating nearly $7 billion in revenue for distillers, According to the Distilled Spirits Council of the United States, Russia's share of the market isn't as large as popular imagination may suggest. Russia accounted for a little more than 1% of the dollar amount of vodka imported into the U.S. in 2017, according to the website Thrillist, citing data from the Distilled Spirits Council of the United States. Let's go to Michael in Texas, Madisonville, Texas, Democrats line.
Yes, sir. This is about Putin. If he goes to a council meeting later on, we don't know what he's going to do while he's there, or maybe we're going to charge him with war crimes later on. And you got to think about his generals and who's doing all this. You know, later on, they're not going to be able to leave, because you never know what they're going to do over there to the Ukrainian people.
Republican line. Next up, Kelly in Clemens, North Carolina, Republican line.
Hi. I just wanted to say that
wake up to the pop.
In years. If you're thinking cloudy or anything like that, temperatures getting into the mid to
NATO, well, not NATO, but Biden is afraid of what Putin will find out. There's all kinds of corruption with the Clintons, the Bidens, Soros, and Obama.
Rich in Kingsport, Tennessee, Independent line. Hi.
Hey, Pedro. One thing, I don't know if I've heard this mentioned or not, but, you know, I keep hearing Trump as usual. I haven't heard people talking about Biden's statement a few weeks back about, or a month or so ago, about it depends upon whether it's only a minor incursion. And then, you know, Psaki had to try to clean that comment up. But if we were acting like every statement is driving Russia's actions, we would have to say that was a signal that NATO is not united, and that certain actions by Russia would be permitted, and we'd be holding Biden accountable for that. Sanctions are definitely the only thing we have going now, other than supplying military aid to Ukraine. And I think this situation has emphasized why we need to become sufficient with our own energy supplies, and the cancellation of the pipeline, why that was an important decision and why that needs to be rethought. So, but I do think that minor incursion comment needs to be brought up occasionally, at least, every time that someone blames Trump, who hasn't been in office for well over a year.
Okay. Rich there in Tennessee. One more call. Stephen from Vero Beach, Florida, Republican line. Go ahead.
Morning, Pedro. I know we're running out of time, so I'm going to try and talk quickly. I just think this whole thing is setting up perfect for President Trump. This thing's going to go on for another 10 days, 2 weeks or whatever. Then he's going to fly to Moscow, and there's going to be a de-escalation, and everything's going to work out. And I think it's all set up that way if you just give it time. And then that's the way I see it going down. They're going to
and what leads you to believe that?
Biden there, and Trump's going to fly in and save the day.
And caller, what leads you to believe that?
You just give it time. I think that's the way it's going to transpire. Thank you. Have a good day.
Okay, that's Stephen there, Florida, finishing us an hour of your calls.
Thick of it all, underscoring the unique.
How does Dr. Markham read?
Unto God, all ye lands.
Thank you. And USDA certified organic, farm to table fresh in every.
It's occurring, but once.
As long as Russian troops are battling or occupying Ukraine. I'm Howard Kurtz, and this.
People at libraries. Yeah, I've spent a lot of time in libraries. Well, I stand corrected.
Ahead, we'll look at whether the press is favoring Joe Biden's pick of Ketanji Brown Jackson for the Supreme Court. As the Russian invasion of Ukraine has moved from threat to stark reality, the pundits have been taking aim at
agree.
For this time. Like it, come thou fount of every.
Banks that together hold around $1 trillion in assets. Between our actions and those of our allies and partners, we estimate that we'll cut off more than half of Russia's high-tech imports. It will be a major hit to Putin's long-term strategic ambitions.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy is pleading with the U.S. and the West for more help.
This morning we are defending our country alone. Just like yesterday, the most powerful country in the world looked on from a distance. Russia was hit with sanctions yesterday, but these are not enough to get these foreign troops off our soil.
The mood in Ukraine is panic and resolve. Some rushed to banks to withdraw cash in the hopes of fleeing the country. Others took shelter in underground subway stations, using them as bunkers. Residents were encouraged by Ukrainian officials to take up arms to defend the country. There are growing concerns the democratically elected government in Kyiv will be toppled. Joining me tonight to discuss this and more, Peter Baker, Chief White House Correspondent for The New York Times, David Martin, National Security Correspondent for CBS News, and Ann Simmons, Moscow Bureau Chief for The Wall Street Journal. She is joining us from Russia. Thank you all for being here. And I want to start with you. You are in Russia. What do we know about the latest about what's happening on the ground in Ukraine? And also, what is Vladimir Putin hoping to achieve, both in the short term and in the long term?
Well, it's clear that there's an all-out assault on Ukraine by Russian forces, by land, by air, by sea. Mr. Putin has made clear that his end goal is basically regime change. He wants to take the Ukrainian capital of Kiev. He has made clear that he wants to get rid of President Zelenskyy and that he wants to install basically someone who will be a bit more favorable to the Kremlin.
And you're talking about sort of him wanting to install someone and really, I guess, in some ways take away the democratic elected government there. Really quickly, briefly, also when you think about sort of the rationale behind this, how he wants to be viewed by the history books, take us inside Putin's thinking on that front.
It's really difficult to get inside Mr. Putin's head, that's for sure. But the one thing that's clear is that he wants to make Russia great again. He's always made that clear. He wants to re-establish Russia on the global stage as a superpower. He has always thought that there are only two countries that the world should be listening to, or at least should have a say in terms of the world order, and those countries are Russia and the United States. There was a great humiliation after the demise of the Soviet Union. Mr. Putin, as you know, was a KGB officer, and he really felt that the Russian Empire still needed to exist. And he has been trying ever since coming to power to basically re-establish Russia, ensure that Russia still has respect on the global stage.
And David, Ann's talking about sort of making Russia great again. You've been covering the Pentagon since just a few years after the Soviet Union collapsed. I wonder, when you look at this situation, how quickly could Ukraine become fully under control of Russia? And also, when you think about it, what happens next, and how long could this occupation go forward?
Well, the original fear was that Kyiv, the capital, could fall within a day or two. The Russians are not advancing as quickly as they thought. The Ukrainians are fighting, and the Russians may well have underestimated the opposition they are receiving from the Ukrainians, but we shouldn't fool ourselves here. Russia has only committed about a third of those 150,000 plus troops it had amassed around the border. So it has much, much more firepower that it can roll in against Ukraine. So what Russia calls the correlation of forces still heavily favors Putin's side. And Zelenskyy knows this. I mean, he's telling his people tonight this could be the night that decides the fate of our country. Now, the question is the fall of Ukraine, the deposing the Zelenskyy government, installing a puppet regime, is that going to be enough? Or is Putin going to feel compelled to eliminate every last pocket of resistance in Ukraine, in which case this battle could go on for certainly days, if not weeks.
And David, you said that Russia has more firepower. Is there thinking that he could be moving into possibly NATO territories later on? And does that change the calculation for American military troops who are not, President Biden has said, going to fight in Ukraine to defend that country's sovereignty?
I don't think there's a fear that he is going to move into NATO countries, because that's a whole different ballgame. But the concern is that he is going to permanently station troops in both Ukraine and Belarus. And that will radically redraw the military map of NATO, and that is why the U.S. and other NATO countries are activating this response force to put thousands more troops up closer to what will be the new front line with Russia in countries like Poland, Romania, and the Baltic states.
And Peter, as we talk about sort of the military options here, sanctions have now been imposed personally on Vladimir Putin from the U.S. and from the EU. I wondered, can you talk a little bit about what especially President Biden hopes to gain from these sanctions, and also what's the next step if things continue to deteriorate and these sanctions don't change Russia's calculations and their actions?
Yeah, I think going after President Putin is a big step. It's something that wasn't done even during the Cold War. It's traditionally, you don't sanction heads of state. It has been done before, but usually in very limited circumstances with rogue states, not with something as large as Russia. And so what they're saying is that they're making a statement. They're going after Putin where they think he is most vulnerable, and that is, of course, the ill-gotten gains that he is believed to have stashed in various places around the world. Now, the trick here is that President Putin knows that this is what the West would or could do. He's known that for weeks, and he's already figured that into his calculus. And when he made the decision to go into Ukraine, he already figured that this is a trade-off he was willing to live with. And so while the sanctions may serve as a punishment and maybe increase the cost of this action by President Putin, they're clearly not a deterrent. They're clearly not going to stop him at this point in the process. We heard President Biden say a couple of days ago, I think a day ago actually, it seems like forever, was that he was going to give it a month or so to see how these sanctions are affecting Russia. And we'll see whether that changes the calculus. But at the moment, this is something President Putin expected. This is something he's willing to live with. And so that's not going to change the action on the ground, it doesn't look like.
And in talking about sanctions, Russia, you told our producers, has gone to great lengths to make its economy sanction-proof. Have we heard anything specifically from Vladimir Putin in response to him being personally sanctioned? And I also wonder, what are the domestic challenges for him when you think about the fact that there are protests going on in Russia and there might be body bags coming back to Russian communities?
This is not good for Vladimir Putin. Of course, he needs the public on his side. He has made very clear that he feels that many Russians, most Russians, are behind him. And in the beginning, before the invasion, polls actually showed that more than half the Russian population actually agreed with giving independence to eastern Ukraine, the eastern Ukrainian Donbass region, which Mr. Putin recognized as independent, two breakaway regions there. So he really feels that, yes, I have the Russian people on my side. Nevertheless, it also depends on what Russians are actually seeing. State media here has, basically jumped on this narrative that Mr. Putin is pushing, that Russians are at risk, they're at threat in Ukraine. There is a genocide, he has said, against the Russian-speaking population there. He has said they are discriminated against. And that really does play to Russian sentiments. On TV, you do see that there is shelling of cities in Ukraine, but the commentary is that the targets being hit are unknown targets. And definitely that the commentary is that Russians are not, sorry, that Ukrainians, the Ukrainian public is not being targeted, that civilians are not the target or in the way of Russian forces. Now, Mr. Putin is taking a bit of a gamble here because there have been some protests on the street. On Thursday evening, for example, there are at least 2,000, almost 2,000 arrests of people, or detentions, I should say, of people who went out onto the streets to protest and to say no to war. And this was across around 58 different cities in Russia. And there were 900 detentions alone in Moscow. Those people are very brave, because it's not possible, it's very dangerous to protest in Russia. There is repression, there is a crackdown. So there is this underlying kind of feel that among Russians that not everyone is buying into the narrative. One last point I'll make, there has been a petition on change.org basically calling for no war. And that petition is growing. It shows that there is this wave in Russia of people who say no to war, and that this is not what we're doing. We don't deserve this. It is the government. It's not the people of Russia.
Yeah. And David, I want to come to you because in his speech announcing these military actions toward Ukraine, President Putin talked about the fact that that people who were trying to interfere would suffer consequences like we've never before seen in history. Obviously, Russia is a nuclear power. Talk a bit about sort of the concern there when it comes to nuclear weapons being used, or even the threat of nuclear weapons being used.
Well, and that was an obvious threat to use nuclear weapons. And it was certainly not a coincidence that in the days before the invasion, he conducted a nuclear exercise and was made sure to be seen on television observing the exercise. He has deterred the United States from intervening to stop this invasion of Ukraine because of the threat of nuclear weapons. The U.S. is just not going to risk the fact that he might use a nuclear weapon to defend Ukraine. We support Ukraine, but the president made it very clear right from the start, U.S. troops were not going into Ukraine even to rescue trapped Americans, just on the chance that they would somehow get caught in the crossfire between Russian and Ukrainian forces. So, you know, the U.S. has been using economic sanctions in an attempt to deter Putin from invading, but the country that's really been deterred here is the United States with the threat of nuclear war.
And Peter, when you think about the other challenges that President Biden is facing, there's the economic challenges. How could this invasion possibly impact Americans, especially at the gas pump? And what is the White House planning to do about that briefly?
Yeah, it's not a good timing for President Biden. He'd like, obviously, to get the economy doing better, particularly on inflation and energy costs. And now there's a risk that will go the other direction. You've seen the markets roiled in the last few days. You see the price of gas coming up at the pump. And the president's warned Americans that they're going to have to expect to absorb a little pain here. Russia is one of the largest energy producers in the world. We don't get a lot of it here in the United States from Russia directly. Most of that goes to Europe, and they're obviously more on the front line in that regard than the United States is. But the world energy markets are fungible, and if the price goes up elsewhere, it will go up here as well. And that's a problem for President Biden because he's already sort of lagging in the polls. He's in the mid-40s as approval rating, and he would have liked to have been able to spend this time focusing on, curbing COVID and getting the economy in better shape rather than confronting Russia and looking for the economic costs here at home.
And Anne,
He's been planning this for a very long time. If you look back to his days when he was serving the KGB, as he saw the Berlin Wall come down, you can see the seeds of what's been going on over the past 2 decades.
Evil people can be very smart.
Evil people can be very smart.
Yes.
And I think saying that is not a wrong thing to say or in any way a treasonous, unpatriotic thing to say. At the same time, I want that to come with denouncing the evil actions that he does of poisoning and murdering and killing, the early acts of war crime that we potentially see in Ukraine. Like, pair one with the other. Acknowledge that your foe should not be underestimated, and at the same time push back against him. And unfortunately, I far too often see only one of those things being said. And to me, I find that to be totally unacceptable and irresponsible as an approach.
Right. In that radio interview, Trump didn't express any concern for the Ukrainian people, but last night he did call the invasion appalling. Liz, I'm all for political debate. I understand the argument some Americans don't care. Fox poll says 66% are concerned, 32% not concerned about Ukraine. But you were the one who made the point earlier about Putin as a thug, Putin who poisons political opponents, goes after journalists, imprisons his foes. Doesn't that need to be part of the equation?
Oh, 100%. And I agree with Ben. Let's not get caught up in, the fine line between genius and madman. We know where Putin's heading on this. I think it's also important to point out that President Trump did call Vladimir Putin a peacekeeper, which on the preposterous scale of 1 to 10, that's an 11. That said, nobody should be surprised by this. Donald Trump had a very good relationship, sort of a fond relationship with President Putin, but he also was the one who spoke out very candidly and plainly saying, Germany, you're way too dependent on the oil that Russia gets. So there's sort of this splitting the line, and I find that really kind of important to point out. Biden has to look at this and say, look, he had, meaning President Biden, a ringside seat to the humiliation of the Obama administration when Russia annexed Crimea, bid it off, and nobody did anything. So he wants to be tougher, but as you look at the fact that a lot of conservatives see Biden as weak, they see him as not present. The fact is that when President Trump does things like this and the Russians turn it around, this is key, Howie, they turn it around, they put it on a loop tape, and they put it on their state-owned television, along with Mike Pompeo, who I believe said, I have enormous respect for Putin,
Right.
He's elegant, sophisticated.
That's a fair point.
And they use that against the United States, just as Putin is rattling the nuclear saber. That's pretty difficult for conservatives and Republicans to look at and swallow.
Ben, you got a little choked up the other night in Special Report when you talked about your late father-in-law, John McCain, who was a big champion of Ukraine. Let's take a look.
I'm very reluctant to, in any way, speak for my father-in-law when it comes to foreign policy. But I have to believe that John McCain would be disgusted with what he is seeing going on when it comes to Ukraine and the entire Biden agenda when it comes to this moment.
Ben, what do you make of the part of the Republican Party today, a party that used to be fiercely anti-communist, that refuses to criticize Putin or condemn the invasion?
Well, I think that part of the Republican Party has been sold a bill of goods by a lot of people who have used the failures militarily of the last 20 years as an argument that American retreat from the world is a good thing. I think that they've won that argument. I think they've even won the argument in many corners that in some way the West is degenerate and that, China is our civilizational equal, or that we should look up to Putin as a defender of Christian values or something like that. All of that is ludicrous. It's buying propaganda. It's absurd. And I think the people who engage in it are doing so irresponsibly and leading a portion of the party down the wrong path. But I do think that if there is a silver lining to this, it is, to Liz's point, a reassertion of the importance of NATO, the importance of these countries paying their fair share when it comes to defense. We see the most recent changes in policy coming from Germany, which she mentioned, which I think are so critical. Right. And I hope that what this does is make a lot of people reconsider America's role in the world as being something that shouldn't be utopian, shouldn't be fairy tale, but must require engagement in order to defend freedom in the West.
A lot of far-reaching implications here, which the media are going to need to sort out in the coming days, weeks, and months. And I should mention that a lot of establishment Republicans, Mitch McConnell and others, are supporting President Biden or saying he should be tougher when it comes to these financial sanctions. Liz Clayman in New York, Ben Domenichia, thanks very much for joining us. Ahead, how much will the press scrutinize Ketanji Brown Jackson, the president's pick for the Supreme Court? But up next, Jennifer Griffin on separating fact from fiction in this Russian invasion.
What's my say?
Actually praising Putin, and all to appease the former guy. We have two great analysts who will dig into all that after the break.
You can pick out whatever you want.
Is the ability to check facts out.
They have been hyper-vigilant about trying to thwart any kind of disinformation campaigns from taking hold. So they actually have established an agency that is working full-time to understand what is happening in the information environment, both on social media and on broadcast media, what kind of narratives are starting to spread that are not accurate, and they make it a point to get ahead of that information as much as possible.
When it comes to the cyber warfare piece, Axios, the website, did a recent interview with Senator Mark Warner, a Democrat from Virginia. He explained two ways that he at least saw two ways a digital war breaking out. I want to bounce these ideas off you. One of the things he said was, or at least expressed, is that Vladimir Putin would deploy cyber weapons inside Ukraine that take a life of their own and spread to NATO member states, adding that this has happened before, most notably in 2017 when Russia's NotPetya malware was unleashed in Ukraine, ended up causing billions of dollars in damage to companies worldwide. Let's start with that portion. What's the potential of that happening?
Well, there's always a potential. There's always a potential, and the attack that Senator Warner refers to, NotPetya, was sort of indiscriminate. It targeted Ukraine initially, but it was very clear that something in the automation that was behind this attack had spread to targets that perhaps it didn't intend to spread to, such as Western companies that were operating in Ukraine, for example, that ended up being impacted to the order of $10 billion in damage. So it is quite plausible, which is why CISA, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, has been warning U.S.-based companies that do business with Ukraine, for example, to be hyper-vigilant about the kind of network traffic that they're receiving from Ukraine. And it's also been trying to get ahead of a lot of potential tactics. They've released a lot of information to the private sector here, and I would imagine our partners in NATO, in Europe, are doing the same, and other NATO nations. Yes, there is a potential of that happening. The good news is that we know that there is a potential, and we've been preparing for this moment.
He also added that one of the things that we
not do that. Let's fill that space with discussions about what this conflict truly is about and contradicting Russia's narratives that are so prevalent.
Yeah, totally. David, you wrote on Twitter just now that the fog of war has descended, that there's a lot we don't know. I think we should underscore that. There's so many known unknowns. You know, we don't know what's happening 20 miles outside Kyiv. We don't know what's happening in a lot of these communities, and we're not going to know for a while.
Right. We might not know for days or weeks or months about the actual course of the battles that are being fought right now. And I have a general rule. The more specific and dramatic the information, the more suspicion you should apply. I remember when I was in Iraq, learning in real time about the outcome of firefights that were taking place 10 kilometers away involving small numbers of troops was often difficult enough, much less uncovering the truth about what's happening between the clash of two large armies thousands of miles away that don't have embedded reporters in the same way that a lot of American units did. So the more specific the information, the bigger the grain of salt you should read it with. Read with extreme suspicion. Right now, the more reliable reports, quite frankly, are going to be the more high-level, more vague reports. Things like the Russians are disappointed by their progress so far. That's something that I think that we can be pretty sure about. Some report that says 15 kilometers from Kyiv, there was a tank battle involving X number of tanks destroyed and X number of Russian soldiers killed. Take that with a huge grain of salt, because we don't know. We don't have the resources to know. And in fact, we might not know for a long time exactly what happened, where, and when in this fight.
Chime in terms of what this means for Russians at home. There's a reason that the Kremlin is not announcing how many Russian soldiers have been killed. Again, with thanks to our friends at TV Rain, there was a decree signed by Vladimir Putin in 2015 that any operation not called a war justifies keeping in secret any troop numbers that are killed. And so we are not seeing that number, and we are not seeing this being called a war on Russian state television and Russian media, in large part because of this very decree.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody, for this important conversation. And as Bianna said, we're going to talk next with a Russian TV anchor who's pushing back against the Putin narrative. That's ahead in just a moment. Plus, Jon Favreau is joining me, talking about President Biden and the State of the Union coming up on Tuesday. Lots more to come. We'll be right back.
Age-related macular degeneration.
He ascended into heaven and is seated at the right.
Rock, pop, Motown, and doo-wop for a celebration of America's greatest songs.
Mike in Fairbanks.
And for a limited time, you can get it all.
I think she'll get 3 to 5 Republican votes, so he'll have a margin to get her confirmed. If I'm the Republicans, I think for the reasons that you just articulated, this is not a hill to die on. This is something that they should use as an issue going into the midterm to highlight the kinds of judges, the progressive judges that President Biden is putting on the court. So I wouldn't try to derail the nomination, but I would raise the profile of the courts as an issue going into the midterms.
But just briefly, would those criticisms be about her personally and her experience, or more about some of her liberal rulings? It's obviously, you know, Democratic president wins election and goes with somebody from the left.
Yep. Yeah, I think you concentrate on her rulings, and it would be very important for the Republicans to show that, unlike what the Democrats did to Kavanaugh and to some extent to Barrett, we really can have a discussion about issues without having to try to destroy somebody's character.
Andy McCarthy, you have a great piece on this National Review. Good to see you. Thanks very much for helping us out this Sunday.
Thanks, Howie.
Next on Media Buzz, Fox's Jennifer Griffin on the challenge of covering the catastrophe in Ukraine and dealing with Russian propaganda.
The Republican Party. And so these useful idiots out there may be looking bad at the moment, but don't underestimate their ability to pull the Republican Party back in a Trumpian direction. And again, this is a very clarifying moment, because as you've been talking about all morning, you know, this is a former president who has praised Vladimir Putin, who has appeased Vladimir Putin, who actually tried to extort the president of Ukraine. If you ever wanted a moment of moral clarity of what strength looks like, what patriotism looks like, what betrayal looks like, it's right there. But Jonathan, we've been here before, and we've seen how the Republican Party reacts.
Mm-hmm. Max, I would love your reaction. I'm just so gobsmacked by what we showed coming into this segment, but your reaction to everything that we've seen so far.
Well, my reaction would echo what Senator Romney said on another network earlier this morning. And as you know, he is one of the few Republicans of conscience left in this party, where he said, it makes me almost ill. This is nearly treasonous, what we're hearing from some of these pro-Putin Republicans, the ones who are turning GOP into the gang of Putin. I mean, it is shocking, Jonathan, and just to underline the point that Charlie was making, the entire world right now is united in condemning Putin's villainy, his aggression against Ukraine. This is a battle of good versus evil, and we see where a lot of Republicans stand, and it's really striking that the most popular Republican political leader in America, Donald Trump, and the most popular Republican broadcaster in America, Tucker Carlson, are both unabashed fans of Putin. And there are very few Republicans out there like Mitt Romney or Liz Cheney who have the courage to call them out. This is a disgrace This is shocking. I still can't believe, as somebody who grew up in the Republican Party of Ronald Reagan in the 1980s when he was calling the Soviet Union the evil empire, I still can't believe this is where the Republican Party has wound up, but this is where it is. And, you know, I keep hoping that there will be some kind of recalibration. I kept hoping that after January 6th, the Republican Party would end its infatuation with Trump and with authoritarianism. That didn't happen. Now I'm hoping that after the invasion of Ukraine, the Republican Party, a lot of the MAGA base, will end their infatuation with Putin and authoritarianism. And sadly, I suspect I will be disappointed in that regard as well.
You know, Max, I keep thinking back to a question that was asked of Vice President Harris at the Munich Security Conference after she gave her speech from the president of the organization, who kind of put her on the spot by asking her to give assurances to the world and to Europeans that Donald Trump wouldn't come back. I understand where that question comes from, because folks are worried, and tell me if I'm wrong, but our allies are worried that this moment that we're in is just an interregnum before we go back to what we had 4 years ago, and that is the United States run by a president with autocratic tendencies who has more in common, or feels he has more in common, with Vladimir Putin than he does with NATO, the EU, and the allies who've been stalwart allies of the United States for more than 7 decades.
Well, I wish I could say that those concerns are groundless, but I fear that they are in fact rooted in reality. I mean, if you look at it right now, Donald Trump is the clear frontrunner for the Republican nomination in 2024. I would go so far as to say I don't think anybody else will even run against him if he throws his hat into the ring. And he could easily get the Republican nomination, and then he could just as easily, I think, defeat either Joe Biden or Vice President Harris, depending on the state of the economy. I mean, right now, you look at President Biden's approval ratings, they're under 40%. That's shocking. That's terrible news for Democrats. They're almost certainly going to lose the midterm elections in the fall, and it's setting up a very tough re-election campaign in 2024. And guess what? Donald Trump is making clear that he loves Putin. He called his invasion of Ukraine an act of genius, said it's very smart. And so you have to be concerned. Is Donald Trump expecting Putin to help elect him once again, as he did in 2016?
Charlie, I'm going to give you the last word here.
Well, I share the concerns, because in a lot of ways this feels like January 7th. You asked about this before, where you had a moment where you realized how absolutely unhinged and irresponsible and traitorous Donald Trump was, but then Republicans took a deep breath and they decided they were okay with that. That may happen again. On the other hand, we do have this moment of clarity. The reason that Vladimir Putin did not invade Ukraine when Trump was president is because he was getting everything he wanted. He saw Donald Trump as the way to break up and undermine NATO. And that's what's at stake now in Trump 2.0. You bring Donald Trump back, and Donald Trump will destroy the alliance that we are now seeing standing up against Vladimir Putin. And quite frankly, I guess I do have some residual confidence in the American people that they will not want to do that.
I have residual confidence, too. And y'all better not disappoint. Charlie Sykes, Max Boot, thank you both very much for coming to the Sunday Show. Next, Republicans have made clear that Judge Jackson won't be approved to the Supreme Court without a fight. And it's going to be ugly. Stay right here.
There was something that they could do to help educate people on that.
Which does not exist if you read the Constitution of Russian Federation. We obey the law, which is the most important for us. And we do everything. We follow every single rule that is written in the Constitution of Russia. But we understand that these guys from the government, they do ignore the law of Russian Federation. They are trying to set this military censorship. They are trying to shut down every free voice and every free media here. But, you know, we ignore the demand not to show our viewers the whole picture, understanding that we are under the huge threat. We are under the terrible, devastating threat. The whole journalism, the whole freedom of speech is under this threat. But we are, you know, I don't know for how long it will take, and how long will we be able to say everything we need to say, to be professional journalists in Russia. And it's very important, you know, to get the support from the independent world, from the civilized world, from the leaders of different countries. You know, I have recorded Anthony Blinken just a week ago, and Victoria Nuland was on air with my colleague yesterday. We are trying to show the whole picture. We're trying, to get all the positions as long as we can. We will do it.
Katerina, I just pulled up your YouTube channel. You have so many people watching live on YouTube around the world. Everyone can check it out. TV Rain, just search it. You'll find it right away. Katerina, thank you for being here and best of luck.
Thank you very much.
Pod Save America podcaster Jon Favreau is on deck. Plus, why are these classics winding up on banned book lists? The head of Penguin Random House, one of the world's top publishers, is here with an announcement about combating book bans.
At Intracellular Therapies, we're inspired by our circle, a circle that includes our researchers, driven by our award-winning science, who uncover new medicines to
pills are just
way. Kyiv was baptized in 900 AD. There are churches in Kyiv that are 1,500 years old. Lviv is also a very old city. So Ukrainians as an ethnicity, as a people, have been in existence for some time. Unfortunately, they were always part of a larger empire, and those empires have shifted, and the borders have shifted quite a bit. In its current form, actually, this is funny because President Putin had gone on quite a soliloquy about the history of Ukraine, and that's probably what inspired your question. But he's wrong that the present-day Ukraine was established in 1922. You know, there were parts of Ukraine that were joined after World War II, for example, that were stolen by Stalin and Hitler and divided from Poland. There are parts of Ukraine that were added in 1954. So the question of history of Ukraine is less relevant to this conflict than the question of, do we live in the world where sovereignty of a nation and its borders are taken by force, or do we not live in that world? And we thought we settled that question in 1945, but here we are.
We'll go to Claudia, Gainesville, Florida, for